Okay, so today we're going to be talking about how to stop procrastinating for women in STEM and to train our brains to take more action. And my name is Melissa Anders. We're working on first principles for women in STEM for personal and professional development. And we're in number 5 of a series. And today we're going to be talking about how procrastination, the surprising things about what is keeping you procrastinating, and also how to stop it by understanding your brain a bit better. And the biggest message that I really want you to take away today is that the way our brain works, it really, there's nothing wrong with us when we are procrastinating. I think so many of us can make it mean that there's something wrong, that we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And this discovery for me was life-changing. Just accepting the fact that this is part of what's happening for my brain and understanding more about it has just totally changed so much around my own productivity versus procrastinating. So really, really excited to share this with you so that you can kind of leap over some of the stuff that took me many, many years to learn. So, what's happening with when we're procrastinating? Like, what does it look like at first of all, right? So, and I just put this to remind me to tell you to stay to the end because I have a favorite thought that I use that really helps me to stop procrastinating. So I'll be sharing that with you at the end. But what does procrastinating look like? And I really kind of see three different scenarios for when we're procrastinating. And they're really distinguished by like whether we have a deadline or not. So oftentimes if we have a deadline and we are procrastinating, we're sort of in this stage of inaction until we get close enough to that deadline that like our urgency kicks in, our anxiety kicks in, our stress kicks in, and it just like forces us, it pushes us to take some action so that we get things done um, for the deadline. But if we don't have a deadline, typically we can go a really long time and not take any action. And even if we're like, okay, well, let's just make our own internal deadline, that will help push us. But a lot of time that doesn't work either because we just either ignore that internal deadline or we don't take it seriously like we would an external deadline or someone um, something outside of us, right? So what's really happening here when we're procrastinating? So last time I talked a bit about the reflexive brain and the deliberate brain, and so go back if you haven't watched that yet. But what's happening here when we're procrastinating is it's a signal that at least this is the way I choose to look at it now, is that it's a signal that the reflexive brain is running the show. That survival-based brain is in the driver's seat. And it doesn't want to make the effort and it's avoiding discomfort, also known as uncomfortable feelings like self doubt, uncertainty, confusion, overwhelm, which are often the feelings that we're avoiding when we're procrastinating. So, what I wanted to do is sort of take a minute to really help you see how your reflexive brain is actually working. So I want you to take a second and just imagine for yourself or ask the question, what's 2 times 2? Okay. So immediately what comes to mind is 4, right? Like you don't have to think about it, nothing, it just pops in, right? That's your reflexive brain working automatically based on many, 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 many years ago, for me, many years ago, that when we learned 2 times 2, right? But there was a point when we didn't know it and it was effortful. But now it's very automatic and we just do it. But now if I ask you what's 217 times 365, your brain's like, I'm not doing that, right? Like get me my calculator. I'm not doing that. Or you have to give me a really good reason to sit down and do the math of that calculation, right? And that is like literally, I love this because it's literally our reflexive brain at work and we can see it. We get to actually start to feel what that resistance is like, right? So if you really let yourself sit with that question of like, what's 217 times 365 and pause and really feel that, that is the resistance of our reflexive brain, like the difference between putting the effort into something and just saying like, no, I'm not doing that. And you can see how it's like the first thing that comes in, right? So our reflexive brain is always doing its job, right? And its job is to conserve energy, avoid discomfort, and seek pleasure. And this is normal. Therefore, procrastinating is normal. There's nothing wrong with you. But there's two ways to bypass the reflexive brain and stop procrastinating, which we never have been taught this. I was never taught this. I had no idea. I just pushed through all the time using stress, anxiety, urgency to get myself to get anything accomplished. Um, and I'll just side note, it gets harder when you get out of school. When there's no deadlines, right? And it's like if your manager doesn't manage you, and there's like no weekly meeting or something, then you can go like months without getting stuff done because there's no sense of urgency. So learning this is critical for your professional development and personal development too. So, okay, so two ways to bypass reflex brain and stop procrastinating. One is to have an answer. Why are you doing 217 times 365? Have a really compelling reason about the task that is effortful, right? It's also the difference between the tasks that we do that are automatic. We're like, why don't I ever procrastinate about getting my coffee? Versus how we procrastinate about starting a new presentation or project, right? It's because it's effortful and this part of our brain is like, I don't want to do it. So the way to do it is to answer why ahead of time and have a really good reason. Because if I had a reason for 217 times 365, if you told me that I can only think of like a really extreme example, but if something was really um bad was going to happen to a member of my family, like I would do the math, right? So you have to have, it doesn't have to be a scary reason, but a compelling reason. I love to lean on purpose, which we'll talk about more. Um, the second one is to learn how to feel uncomfortable. So the part of you that's avoiding the doubt, the anxiety, the overwhelm, the confusion, the uncertainty that may be what you're avoiding when you're procrastinating is learning how to feel some of those uncomfortable emotions and allow them and then do the task or find a way to start. So we're going to talk more about each of these two. And what happens is you start to bit by bit work on the task, work on the task, work on the task until it's complete. You repeat your why to yourself. You feel uncomfortable when needed. And you just keep moving, but it's without the stress, without the anxiety, but more with a consistency and a purpose. It's a completely different way of working. So the first way to bypass is the compelling reason why, and this is how you do this. Okay. So the first is to answer these questions and write them down. And you repeat it to yourself before you start the task. You just write it down. I will literally write it out for myself if I'm really having a challenge with procrastinating around something. So why is this important to me? How does it align with my values? How does it pull my future forward? This, okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. So why is this important to me? What I love to do is really dig deep here. And I will do what's called the 5 whys and ask why again and again and again so that you can really understand like what's the deep reason behind why this is important to me. And it has to be compelling. It has to be something that is creating that desire for yourself to do the thing. Um, And different questions come up around this, like, well, what if it's just like a menial task that I don't want to do? And it's like you have to find it for yourself. It doesn't, maybe in that case it's not some deep, big purpose, but it could be something um that you think is important, right? So and by the way, menial is a thought, so we can always decide how we're going to be thinking about things. The other is, how does it align with my values? So your values are really powerful tools in order to connect in with what's really important to you. So if it's for me, like if for me, it's really important to live a life where I am um, like going to bed at the end of the day and really feeling like I gave it my all. So I can tap into that when I'm procrastinating about something and remind myself like how good it's going to feel when I do the thing that was really hard for me, and tapping into that longer term energy, you could call it, right? Versus our reflexive brain is that immediate reward. The third, how does it pull my future forward? This is actually a new question for me that I've learned like in the last couple months, and I just love it. Because how many times do we, when we're procrastinating, and then when we finally do the thing, we're like, why did this take me so long to do this? And it's literally just because it's like getting through that part of our reflexive brain, right? And once we do, then we often find that it was like, oh, this was not such a big deal. Like it's okay. And as a result, you literally pull your future forward, excuse me, when you take action. So I just love that question. And then so build a compelling reason why, write it down, and then refer to it whenever you're doing this task. And it's about the thing that you're procrastinating about. Okay. The other way that we can bypass our reflexive brain that causes us to procrastinate is by processing our feelings or at least acknowledging them. And here's how you can do that. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about these already, but it's basically a thought download. So write down like half a page or 5 minutes when you sit down to do the task. And this in and of itself can just be helpful because you've started, right? Like you have started the process, even if it's just like, okay, how am I feeling about doing this and writing it down? Then you're going to do a model on one feeling, and that's your acknowledgement of the model and also normalizing it. Like if it's a really big project and you're feeling overwhelmed and you don't know where to start, those are all thoughts that you're thinking about it that are creating overwhelm. So that makes sense, right? It's like based on what my brain is thinking right now, conveniently, so that I'm not making effort, right? And I'm conserving energy, then it normalizes it for you and reminds you that it's like this makes sense. I make sense based on what I'm thinking. Then I like to look at the facts to neutralize it. So if using that example of a project that's big, so big is an opinion, right? So like, how big is it actually? Like, is it 60 slides? Okay. So now I'm looking at 60 slides or whatever it is. Um, so that just helps you to neutralize it a little bit when you look at the facts and pull those out, just like you would in your model, in your circumstance line. And then the last question is, how could you choose to feel about it? In other words, like what now? So now that I've sort of looked at it, I've got 60 slides. What do I want to think about these 60 slides? That isn't like, I don't know where to get started, or that is more helpful to me than I don't know where to start, right? What I find is really helpful is to zoom out, to get a different perspective on it. That you can do that in a variety of different ways, but even like if someone else was looking at this, where would they start? Sometimes that's easier, different things. Um, but whatever you choose to think about it, so in that example, I might just think I can start somewhere. I can start with my first slide, or I could start with my last presentation. That was similar to this. I can open that file, like just what's one thing that I can believe in the moment about getting started. So that's really how you process your feelings which are what that part of what the reflexive brain is really avoiding. And when you do that, then you start taking action, right? Um, so for today, what I would offer you to do for lab work in your life is to think about what you've been procrastinating about. Do those two things, write a compelling reason why, and then go through the process of acknowledging your feelings about it, about why you've been procrastinating about it, and then take one small step so that you can start to move through this process with more purpose, more consistency, less stress, less anxiety, less urgency, less uncertainty. And this will change your life in terms of productivity and also just in it gives your brain less to chew on in terms of like you not doing what you're supposed to be doing. So the less you're procrastinating, the less you'll be beating yourself about it, which in and of itself is like such a huge win, even though that's something that we have control over too all the time anyways. And that I would offer that if you are procrastinating to like use this process and use it as a way of having your own back and taking care of yourself through it. Things that are hard. Some things are overwhelming, right? Some things, and it's like we have these pathways that our brain uses to conserve energy effectively, right? And we may be doing other things instead, but we're not doing the effortful thing. That's often a common thing that happens for my clients. And yeah, so my favorite thought to stop procrastinating, I just love this one. I use it all the time. It works really well. Once you've done some of this work, so you kind of have the awareness and you know what's happening. Once I notice I'm procrastinating and I acknowledge how I'm feeling about it, and I know what the next step is to take, I just start telling myself, I'm just going to start pulling the thread here. I'm just going to start pulling the thread here. I don't know exactly where it's going to go. That's okay. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it's done in the next hour and on to the next thing. So that's what I've got for you today about procrastination. I hope these gives you some new tools to really break through this piece with respect to productivity and supports you in your personal and professional development. I'll see you next time.